Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mark Reading of Atlassian and Holly Copeland of Horizon Therapeutics.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure as an Aussie to be here in New York to be talking about the role of business in doing good and to have the wonderful Holly Copeland here with me. Holly is the Executive Director of Corporate Social Responsibility, Sustainability and Impact at Horizon Therapeutics. Holly, I'm not sure that everybody in the audience would know that much about Horizon. Perhaps it's worth sort of providing a little bit of background information to kick things off.
Sure, thank you, Mark. Happy to be here. So Horizon Therapeutics is a global biotechnology firm. We focus on treating rare, rheumatic, and anti-inflammatory diseases. These are patient populations that are incredibly small. So oftentimes within healthcare, you might have a lot of innovators that are tackling larger scale problems that have very large patient populations that make it very easy to recoup those R&D costs. In our case, our founding CEO has several rare diseases himself, and so this has been a personal passion of his to open up resources and to develop solutions for these patients that oftentimes don't have medicines and can have very debilitating life experience as a result of not having access to medicine.
Okay. And Horizon is in fact a member of the Pledge 1% movement. In fact, I understand that Horizon was probably the first biotech to become a member of the Pledge 1%
You've heard that,
movement.
yes.
Yes, indeed. I'm actually the chair of Pledge 1%, and for those of you who have not heard of Pledge 1%, it's a US-based non-profit that has a global focus, and the purpose of Pledge 1% is to inspire and support businesses to bake social impact into the DNA of the business at the earliest opportunity. It was established in 2015. Salesforce and Atlassian were the two co-founders of Pledge 1%. And essentially it is encouraging founders of businesses to pledge to use some combination of 1% of the equity of the business, 1% of the profits, 1% of the employee's time, and or 1% of product for impact, for good. And so it is a very simple conceptual model that provides a framework for businesses embedding goodness into the DNA of the business. As a Pledge 1% member and an inspiring Pledge 1% member, Horizon is definitely one of those organisations that I look to with a sense of pride that Pledge 1% has had some impact on the way you do things and what you do. Holly, can you tell us a little bit about the way in which Pledge 1% has influenced Horizon and some of the things that you do to bring the pledge to life?
For sure. So at Horizon, in 2015, I had joined the team, and the company was still very young at that time, very much still an entrepreneurship venture. And because of the vision of our founding CEO in wanting to build a company that really had community at the essence, at the core, but in a really tangible and meaningful way, brought me on board to sort of help create or bring his vision to life. And when starting from scratch, it's helpful to have some sort of parameters or a template that can guide you. And that's what we found in Pledge 1%, in providing us this roadmap that we could leverage to help guide us in our decision making on what kind of programs we wanted to institute within the company, how to measure progress towards those goals, and then to create a pathway for the future, right? So because the goals are tied to 1%, it allows you to scale your impact as your business continues to scale. And so that was incredibly helpful in making the justification that as each year the business improved, we could also improve the impact that we were having in communities across the world.
Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that the Pledge 1% tries to encourage is founders signing up to the pledge as early as possible in the life cycle of the business. It's much easier to commit 1% of equity or profit or time or product when you have equity that's worth very little, or you have very little profit, or you have very few employees. And then as the business grows, you get to sort of share the growth with the community in the areas that you're passionate about. it sounds to me as though Horizon sort of didn't take the pledge until a little later. What's your thinking around the optimal timing for sort of pledging, and can you talk a little bit about your own experience with regards to timing?
Sure. So the pledge itself is flexible, which is nice because in cases like ours, we were in fact a public company. We had just gone public in 2011, but we didn't necessarily feel like taking the pledge would dictate that we had to produce these outcomes. It created the flexibility. Here's our roadmap, here's our guide, this is our North Star. And so for us, using that as a talking point was incredibly helpful in having conversations about how we set budgets and where we invest our dollars. I will say also, we were not profitable at the time. And so taking that decision to invest in community was something that a public CEO, had to think about. But in our case, the investment created so much residual value that was unanticipated, that I would argue was a phenomenal decision, because even in areas like recruitment of talent, for example, you think that the philanthropic decision making is siloed and you're only affecting certain stakeholder groups. But in our case, what we found is that, especially as a startup, you're competing for talent in a pretty significant way, and sometimes you can't meet the salaries or the benefits that some of these larger, more established companies can provide. And so what we were able to do is to say, here we are, we're investing in the community in this way, this is our North Star, and that attracted a lot of very talented people who were driven by more things than just money, right? So we'd had individuals come in for interviews who had said, from C-suite down to entry-level employees, that they were incredibly attracted about how we show up in the community, how it's such a foundational pillar of who we are in the community, and ultimately they ended up choosing to come to Horizon. And you look back, you can't really see that impact over the course of maybe 1 year or 2 years, but now looking a decade back, we have this incredible culture that we've built because we attract the kind of people that further infuse that ideology. In fact, just yesterday we were named, I think it was the #1 healthcare company in biotech by Forbes. So being a relatively smaller company, these are incredible accomplishments that I believe are rooted in these kind of commitments.
Yeah. And certainly that's been our experience as well. For me, I would say that provided the commitment to impact is authentic,
yes,
then the business benefits actually flow. If the commitment is actually being done for branding or business purposes, then the, pardon my Australianism, the bullshit detector in all of us tends to pick up on that, and actually I think you erode the business benefits. I don't know whether or not you've got any thoughts on that particular topic.
Well, I will say, we were talking backstage about this. The authenticity comes out in the hard moments, right? When business is going great, profits are looking good, everyone's happy, the money's flowing, and that's great. However, when things are not going so great, when there's a lot of uncertainty in the market, how do you perform from a philanthropic perspective in those moments? So for us, for example, during COVID, there was a lot of uncertainty. People didn't know what was going to happen, how it was going to impact the business, and a lot of groups kind of scaled back some of the philanthropy because they weren't sure what the future held. But in our case, and I'm very grateful for this, our leadership actually doubled down. So we doubled our philanthropic budget during COVID, because we knew that the value would not just provide a positive impact on the community, but also our internal stakeholder groups. So they knew that there was some authenticity behind the words that we've been saying for the past 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not so much a discretionary decision each year what the budget is that's being allocated towards philanthropy or corporate social responsibility. It's actually a principles-based decision, and hence it's easier to follow through maintaining the principle. I think in your case, your CEO considered taking the equity pledge post-IPO, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do. It's not that easy to take the equity pledge even pre-IPO, particularly if you've already got investors on board. Fortunately, many of America's venture capitalists and the like are very supportive of the Pledge 1% movement. But what were the challenges that you faced, and talk us through what actually happened there?
Sure. So the first step was to look at all the numbers and see where we fell out on all 4 of the areas within the Pledge 1%. And we were very pleased to find out that the first 3 we were already hitting. So all we had to do was maintain. But the equity was challenging because post-IPO, it's not possible to set aside equity for philanthropic purposes. So we actually worked with the team at Pledge 1% to create a model that would enable companies that wanted to provide equity matches or equity donations, leveraging their employee equity and using the company cash match as a mechanism. We ended up being successful in creating that, which was great. It's not as impactful as if you're able to actually set aside the equity before, but I feel like this is one of the areas where Pledge 1% is really like on the avant-garde of releasing new access to capital in ways that can have a profound impact. If any company chooses to do this pre-IPO, as that equity increases in value, your ability to have an impact could be transformational depending on the journey of that company.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't share earlier, but actually the Pledge 1% movement now has 17,000 members globally.
Yeah.
And with $20 million worth of funding to date, it's mobilised well in excess of $2 billion worth of capital. So the leverage that you get is fantastic. And then seeing what companies like Horizon are doing to apply that capital in impactful ways is very inspiring. You've had a very interesting life and career. What are some of the sort of the key learnings or insights you've had along the way, and what could you share with other founders who are contemplating drawing upon your experience?
Sure. So I was sharing that I feel like, having been a young teen mother myself from a lower income background, I have this sort of lived experience of the stakeholder group that we're trying to support in the work that we do. And after that, I was in government for a period, and then now on the corporate side, I think the major learning that I've brought to the work that we do every day is how necessary it is to find common ground with others and try to speak a language that others understand. Your CFO might understand that it's important to give back to the community, but where there's value for that particular person might be different than your HR leader. So really being incredibly mindful about who you're speaking with, and then trying to position the impact in a way that can get them on board, because ultimately at the end of the day, what we want is to be able to leverage all the resources that our various organizations have to do good. And the more people you can get in there, the better.
And you touched upon the resources that you have. In my experience, there's usually a very substantial power imbalance between the philanthropist, the company that is looking to bake impact into the DNA of the business, and the non-profits that they're choosing to support. Any particular thoughts or perspectives on that power imbalance, and what might be done to address it?
Sure. Well, I don't know that this would be a surprise for folks in the room, because we're all engaged in this work, but we've been very mindful about approaching all of our partnerships with a level of humility, right? We don't want to come in and think that we have all the answers on how to solve problems, and instead the preference is to really sit down with folks and ask them what they need, right? No one knows better how to solve the problem than the people themselves that are working in those issues day in and day out. So we really try to apply that ethos in the work that we do, and then hope that it works out. And I will say that's the other beauty about Pledge 1%. There's this entrepreneurial mindset that's embedded into the structure. So there isn't an expectation that things will always work out. There's this flexibility where you can pivot to new areas if it's helpful.
Mm-hmm. Often businesses are thought about as the sharks, and leaving humanity to bear the bill, if you like, pay the bill. What are the biggest challenges that you sort of face these days in continuing to drive impact through Horizon?
Sure. I don't know that I've actually felt this at Horizon, but I've seen it within my peer set, is sometimes philanthropy can be sort of set aside as sort of a nice to have, or not integrated into the strategy or the development of the business itself. I do think the advent of ESG is changing the dialogue around that, the value creation that social programs can have for internal and external stakeholders is being recognized now. So hopefully that'll change. But I do think that's the main barrier that I've seen, is just helping people understand the residual value of the work that we do and how it can affect businesses in very positive ways.
Okay. Well, I guess on behalf of the Pledge 1% movement, I would like to say thanks to Horizon and frankly to every other member, and I would hope that, that potentially the increased knowledge of Pledge 1% and the inspiration that it provides can help many other businesses to really drive impact in the community.
Yes,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.